I entitled my talk today, Going Low, a Long Tradition in U.S. Presidential Politics. And I'm referring there to Michelle Obama's claim that when they go low, we go high. So it's more about negative campaigning. And I'll tell you why I chose that issue. I gave myself a very broad, vague title for the program back in, I think, August, because I thought, I don't know what's going to happen or what I'm going to want to talk about. And I still was kind of up in the air for a long time. And then here's what's been happening with me. It was recently Halloween, as you know, which was very fun for everybody. And the School of Arts and Letters does a trick-or-treat event. So in my department, we thought we would be really clever and let people vote as they trick-or-treated. So we had a red kind of pail and a blue pail full of Hershey's Kisses, and the blue pail said Hillary Clinton and the red pail said Donald Trump. And I told people you can only take one Hershey's Kiss, and you're voting by doing this. So your Hershey's Kiss represents your vote here. So what kind of happened a little bit unexpectedly was I happened to have a bunch of extra Halloween candy that I had at my house that I did not want to have at my house because I was eating it all. So I brought it in that day, and as sort of a joke, I put a Post-it note on my little container, and I wrote, other. Well, that ran out much more quickly than either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump's Hershey's Kisses did. I didn't keep track of how many pieces of candy were in there, so I don't know the results there. And I'm sorry, Joe, I know this is very unofficial methodology that is not accurate. Officially, Donald Trump won that poll, but I'll tell you, people were much more excited about the other option. So I've been thinking a lot about that. And I've been thinking, why are people so sort of cynical and worried about this election? They don't really seem that excited about either candidate, at least the people who came to take candy from my field. And I thought, well, maybe it's all this negative campaigning that we see happening. So here's a little visual representation of what I'm just seeing in informal discussions with a lot of my students who, like some of you are my students, but first-time voters, young people, right? Just this concern that, as I found this quote from somebody on the internet, our country may be going to negative places in a handbasket. Is the U.S. doomed? So what I want to do quickly is talk about what maybe my discipline, history, has to offer in this conversation. Talk about a few examples of going low in American elections, and I'm starting to wonder if maybe there aren't some benefits to going low. What? Okay, I'll just briefly tell you that there's a big debate in my field about whether or not we can even use the past to teach us lessons about today, about the present. I could get into the details with some last names, but I'll just sum it up briefly by saying that beginning probably in the 1950s and 60s, there was this turn in American history, among practitioners of American history, toward sort of thinking about where there's been a lot of conflict in American history. So there's been a lot of focus on that, together with what we might call the postmodern turn, which holds that it's really impossible to get into the minds of anybody from the past. Which is very interesting to think about, and it's true, right? Like the Pilgrims were not just like us, but wearing funny clothes, right? They had a totally different mindset than we did. That is true. However, if you take that too far, where you kind of end up is, why should we study the past, right? And because most of my job is teaching general education students who are not history majors in U.S. history, I've thought a lot about why you should study the past. Do we have something to say? And if we have something to say, isn't a contentious election the time to say it? I mean, I think hopefully so. So here's what I have to say. Is this the worst election in US history? It feels like it right now, I know. Is it even that unique? I don't know. And I'll just move on to talking about this long tradition of going low. Okay, so here's a quote from Tocqueville, who was a famous observer of American politics in 1835. And what he's saying here is that he was surprised to see, and Tocqueville loved the United States, loved the American democracy. He praised it extensively. But what he's saying in this quote is, he's surprised to see that the ablest men are rarely placed at the head of affairs. He's saying there's a lot of great talent amongst the citizens of the United States, but those are not the people in charge. And that's 1835. Dr. Melfi already talked about the election of 1800. You should have seen the terrible things that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams said about one another in that election. This is a political cartoon depicting Thomas Jefferson burning the Constitution on the altar of French despotism. That's what's happening there, except God has sent an amazing eagle down to stop Thomas Jefferson from doing that. Now when you think of Thomas Jefferson, right, you're like, well, that's a founding father. He's a venerated figure in American history. But even so, here he is burning the Constitution in this cartoon. Right? The whole story, as Dr. Melfi mentioned, of Sally Hemings came out during an election. Right? So Thomas Jefferson had children with Sally Hemings, one of his slaves. An investigative reporter who didn't like Thomas Jefferson looked into this, found it out, used it, during negative campaigning. What's interesting about that is for really, decades, a century, over a century, historians ignored that story and said it wasn't true until DNA testing came along and showed us, no, that was true. Just by the way, that is symptomatic of what I would call an erasure of African American experiences in American political history. I feel like I'm cheating a little bit using this example in my long tradition of going low. This is Preston Brooks, who was a senator from South Carolina, caning Charles Sumner on the Senate floor. This happened on the Senate floor. I don't think it really looked exactly like this, but you get the idea. Right? And again, I feel like this is maybe cheating a little bit because this did happen not too long before the Civil War, which is not a great outcome for American politics. Right? But still, 1884, here's a negative campaign that happened by James Blaine against Grover Cleveland, who abandoned his illegitimate child to go on the campaign trail. And so here's a cartoon depicting the mom and the baby, like, oh, I want my papa. Cleveland won that election. Here's an ad making fun of William Howard Taft for being fat. Right? So all three of these candidates are saying, if I'm elected, I will call an extra, so Teddy at the top is saying, Teddy Roosevelt, I'll call an extra session of Congress to enact these laws. And Woodrow Wilson in the middle is saying, I will call an extra session of Congress to revise the tariffs. And William Howard Taft on the bottom is saying, if reelected, I will call my aunt and have another piece of that excellent apple pie. Here's Franklin Roosevelt, again, somebody who today we look back on with them, pretty good guy, pretty good president. Here he is canceling the Constitution. A lot of presidents burning and doing things to the Constitution. A lot in these ads. Even JFK, right? We're in JFK right now. It's really named after JFK. People love Kennedy. Here he is, he was kind of hard to caricature because he was an attractive man, but they managed it, right? Dr. Melfi showed you that very famous, if you are an American historian, the very famous ad with where Johnson's campaign basically said, if you vote for Goldwater, you're going to vote for nuclear war to happen immediately. Look at this, you guys. Ronald Reagan, right? Here's Ronald Reagan as Dracula. He's going to bite into, the Statue of Liberty. I don't know. And this is a reference to the Iran-Contra affair, which you young people will not know what that is, but it was a thing at the time. But see, it's not a flattering portrayal, is my point. And just for fun, I threw in a few more recent references, even though I don't really like going into the very recent past. That's not my thing. Michael Dukakis made a very bad decision to have this terrible photo up in the 1988 election where he got into a tank and he looked really ridiculous. And then for the rest of the election, everybody made fun of that. It was really too easy with Bill Clinton, right? So it says leader of the free world, pointing to him, and then it's pointing down his pants. And it says leader of the free world. Yeah. 2004 saw attacks against John Kerry. Supposedly he had lied about his service in Vietnam. Okay, so those are just some examples. I could show you so many more examples of negative campaigning, people finding the worst they could possibly find about their opponents or about the candidate they did not support in presidential elections throughout literally all of American history, since there has been a United States of America. So why did I tell you all that? Why does that matter? Certainly it is disheartening during an election to see this stuff and to think, I don't really want to vote for any of these people. They're all kind of terrible. I want other. And that's fair. There is this very long tradition of going low. But what I kind of want to suggest is that maybe that's just kind of what's going to happen in a democracy. The United States is a nation that is a compromise. The U.S. Constitution is a series of compromises. It continues to be a nation of compromise. There are millions and millions of Americans, all of whom want different things. So, we have to figure it out somehow. Sometimes people want something to be one way so much that they kind of go to the dark side in terms of how they portray their enemies. But what I'm kind of wondering is, I'm not sure we should say politics must only be civil. Because there's some examples in American history of some pretty serious issues getting smoothed over when they shouldn't have been. Maybe the biggest, most obvious example is after the Civil War. Northerners, for a while, were really excited about the idea of reconstructing the American South. And then they stopped being excited about that idea. And then we don't see African Americans getting their civil rights fully enforced until 100 years later. That's the Civil Rights Movement. Maybe sometimes it's important to think about conflict and to acknowledge that conflict and to acknowledge the existence of people like Sally Hemings and her children.